Alright, here we are again with what we learned from video 1, with measures being the space that counts, the space that holds 4 counts here and here, and the bar line that separates each measure. We learned about quarter notes and quarter rests. So in this video we're going to learn about some of the other kinds of notes. So I'm just going to erase my comments here. And we are back to 4 quarter notes in each measure. So the next note that I would like to introduce you to is called a half note. And a half note gets twice as many beats as a quarter note. So if I take this and I make it a half note, you see this other one disappears because we can only have 4 in one measure. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 beats in a measure in this case, and this is a half note which takes up 2 beats. So if I did that for all of these, we would end up with a total of 4 half notes that each get 2 beats. Now, that's a little hard to hear with the percussion because the sound stops immediately. So what I'm going to do is change this over to an instrument, which will introduce some more lines, but will illustrate this point a little better. Alright, so here we are with a piano as an instrument, and what you will hear is that the tone stays playing for the full 2 beats here and for the full 2 beats here, but when we get here it's going to cut off for the second and fourth beat because that's what the music is telling it to do. Have a listen. I'm going to play that for you one more time. And just for good measure, let's go ahead and change this to a string instrument, which might even further serve to illustrate the point. So here we go with a violin sound. And one more time. Alright, so that's a half note. It takes up 2 whole beats, and it looks just like a quarter note, but you don't color it in the middle. And if it was sitting in a space, it would look like that. Let me zoom in just a little bit for you. You can see that if it's on a line, the line goes directly through. And if it's on a space, then it's taking up the entire amount of the space. The next kind of note that I'll introduce to you is a whole note, which is twice as much as a half note, which is to say that it gets the entire measure, or 4 beats in this case. And there's a corresponding rest I was going to show you here, which is the whole rest, which is a little box that hangs on the underside of a line there, which means that we would rest for those 4 measures. So let's go ahead and zoom out here again and have another listen with the violin. And here we have added a few more measures. And what I'd like to introduce you to now is the 8th note. So let's zoom in here a little bit. The 8th note, you can see, looks a lot like the quarter note, but it has this little flag on it. And it is half as long as a quarter note. It's shorter than the quarter note. Okay? And up until now, we have been counting in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, and now we have to be able to count the beats that happen in between 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I'm here and I play this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can also count it at the same speed if I say the word and in between every number at the same pace. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 as we're going to see down here, when I get right here, it's going to play a note on every time that I'm counting and saying the word and, because these are that fast. And then we get back to here, and it's going to hold it out for 2 beats just like it did up here. So let me add the numbers here for you. And here we go. And this was another kind of rest at the end, which is the half rest, which also gets 2 beats, just like the half note. It looks a lot like the whole note. Let me zoom in. And you can see that the only difference between the half note or half rest and the whole rest is that the half rest sits on top of a line and the whole rest hangs down from the bottom. Okay? Usually when we're reading music and I see a box like this, I know it's going to be a half rest or a whole rest, and the only thing to consider really is whether there are any other notes in the measure. It's not as though I'm sitting there going, is that on the bottom or the top of the line, because when you're reading a whole piece of sheet music, it might be that small when you're looking at it in real life. So, you might not have time, especially if you're reading through it the first time, to understand whether it's a half or a whole rest, based on whether it's on the top or the bottom of a line. Rather, looking at the context, you can see there's no other notes in this measure, so obviously that's going to be a whole rest, and here there is a half note, and then that's obviously going to be a half rest because you've already taken up half of the measure there. So it's not as much about whether it's on the top or bottom of the line as the context of it, but a whole rest will always be hanging down from the bottom right here, and a half rest will always be situated right on top of the line there. I'm going to play this whole passage for you one more time. I'm going to switch it back to piano just for contrast and context. And here we go. So that is an introduction to whole notes and whole rests and half rests. There is also, of course, an eighth rest. So if I were to take all of these out and put them as rests, they would look like this, which is probably the strangest kind of rest we've seen so far. Let me zoom in a little bit. And you can see it is a little almost like a comma and then a line coming down. And so if I put 2 of these back as eighth rests, or eighth notes, you'll be able to see that we have a shorter rest here, and then place 2 eighth notes and a short rest there, and then back up to that note. Actually, let's start at one measure before that so we can lead into it. So let's look at that one more time. And this is what happens if I change that around to where I'm playing it 3 times and just resting once. So that's an introduction to the other basic kinds of notes rhythmically. Here I have created a sheet which kind of lines up all of the notes. You have one whole note per measure. You have 2 half notes per measure. You have 4 quarter notes per measure. You have 8 eighth notes per measure. And you can see that 2 of these eighth notes will fit in the space of a quarter note, and 2 of these quarter notes will fit in the space. They won't spit in the face of 2 of these quarter notes will fit in the space of a half note, and 2 of these half notes, of course, will fit in the space of a whole note. The same is true for their corresponding rests, which you can see over here, and I have tried to line these measures up so that they're pretty apparent. A couple of notes about all of this. Number one, we did introduce these eighth notes as the stem with the flag on it. And what can also be written is they can be written here with a beam. This is called a beam. So these are said to be beamed eighth notes, and these are not beamed, which is to say that they have flags. And you will see them both written out this way. You'll see this more commonly with the flags if they are next to a rest. You might see it where this has become a rest here, like that. And then the rest of them might be beamed. So we might have a flagged note here, a rest there, some beamed eighth notes there, and then because we don't have one on the end, we have another rest, we would again come to a flagged eighth note. So it can be written either way. The other thing I wanted to mention about this page was the rests down here. As far as going back to the whole rest, you will see the whole rest written one of 2 ways, either here in the middle of a measure or here on the left side of a measure. This is more common, and either way will tell you that it's 4 beats of rest. And this page is available for you at learningsheetmusic.com, so you can print that out or save it for your reference. All right, I think it's about time to introduce all of these other fancy lines that we have. We started out with 1 line, and now we're going to 5 on top and 5 on bottom with these 2 different symbols here. So let's break all of this down. Every line and space here represents a note. So if I click on this note, it'll play that sound, and that's a B. And if I go up or down, it will go up or down in pitch accordingly. So that is the purpose of the lines and the spaces, all right, is that they each represent a note, a pitch, and notes will rest either square on the line, where it goes right through the middle, or taking up the entire space, like that, between the lines. So each one of these lines and spaces represents a particular note. Now, this symbol here is called a treble clef, and this symbol here is called a bass clef. And the difference is a couple of different things, and one of them we'll get into later, but one of them is just to know that the treble clef is higher and the bass clef is lower. So if I wanted to put a note here, you can hear already that it's much lower than this one. And I can go even lower than that. So that's pretty low. And that's the purpose of these two clefs is basically to tell us where we're at. You know, are we playing in the higher registers or the lower registers? Now that's a little bit simplified, but we're going to explore this a little bit more in future videos. So this will be the end of this lesson video, and be sure to do your practice video right after this and then once before you go to bed tonight.